So the Deep South Challenge has 5 research programs, including a program dedicated to kaupapa Māori research. To date, we have funded 8 projects in this space and another 4 scholarships for students. All of these have been recognised for the quality of their science, the integral role of community researchers in each project, and the impact the research is having for the communities that are often having to make very hard decisions today in light of what's coming tomorrow. Yesterday, Garth Harmsworth, a valued member of our Kāhui Māori, said of the Deep South Challenge, "We're in a very good position now with the quality and expanse of Māori research in New Zealand. Integrating knowledges across the challenge is so important to inform climate change adaptation." We're thrilled to have acclaimed journalist Mihi Forbes, currently anchoring the hui, to chair our panel and to help explore the question of what hapū and iwi can teach the rest of New Zealand about changing with our climate. Thank you, Mihi, and over to you to introduce our panellists.
E mihi ana kia papatuanuku rawa ko ranginui mea rawa tamariki. Ngāti whātua, Ngāti pāua, tēnā koutou. Te whare e tūnei, tēnā koe. Ngā mate ki wainganui a tātou. E Sandy, kei raro tonu koe i te parikawa o te mate, i te wihinga o tō māma moi mai rā whaihana. Kāre e ārika te mihi te tangi hoki ki te hāpori o te whariwānanga o Waikato, ko tō te rā ki te rangatira ki a Wharihuia Milroy, te karamata o te rākau taumatua, e tangi ana te ngākau ki a koe o te rā, ki o koutou ngā iwi o tūhoi Ngāti Koura hoki, haere atu rā. Hoki anō ki a tātou, kua karapinipini mai tēnei rā, pai mariri ki a tātou. My name is Mihi Forbes. Yesterday was a bad day for Papatuanuku, like a million species in danger of extinction. My son and I have been talking about Nutella and more specifically palm oil and where it comes from. And we watched that really cute video with the little girl and the orangutan in the bedroom, and he's given up Nutella for now. But it's not going to stop the destruction of our living world. We need to transform. Or perhaps we need to turn around and head backwards into the past. Like you all, I come from a long line of wahine. My Māori grandmother's line traces all the way back to Earth, to Papatuanuku. Can you imagine if we treated our grandmothers the way that we treat Papatuanuku? There seems to be a disconnect with our stories, our tikanga, and our actions. Yesterday I was driving back from Palmerston North with my kids, and Mum had thrown a bag of feijoas in the car from her garden. Along with them came a selection of bugs, and my son wanted to kill the bugs before they crawled out of the bag. So we had this conversation about Papatuanuku and Ranginui's children, Tuma Tauinga representing war and people, Tāwhiri Mātia, the wind and the water, Tangaroa, sea and fish, Rongomatāne, cultivation and feijoas, and Tāne Mahuta, forest, birds and bugs. And we talked about how Papatuanuku's children made up our ecosystem, that without water there would be no people or fish, and without rangi and papa, none of the children could survive. And in the end, no bugs were killed, all the feijoas were eaten, and a fair bit of head scratching from the 8-year-old. But I would have thought the stories of Papatuanuku and Ranginui and their children were a blueprint for Māori conservation. It seems somewhere along the way we've lost our connection to Papatuanuku and Ranginui. So as iwi and whānau, I guess the questions are our financial portfolios we're investing in environmentally safe? When we're building housing projects or iwi corporates, are we using the right materials? Are our people driving electric cars? Do we have zero waste at all of our marae? When the rubber hits the road, are we as Māori looking after Papatuanuku and Rangi? Soon we're going to hear from our panellists, but before we start, following this discussion, there will be an opportunity for you, the audience, to have your say, and you can do that through the app Slido, and you can like or dislike questions, and I'll be able to ask those for you. Hoi anō e te iwi, please welcome Aroha Spinks, Massey University, Matapura Ellison, Kāti Huirapa Rūnaka ki Puketeraki, I love speaking your mita. Melanie, Mark-Shadbolt, Ministry for the Environment, Ngarimu, Blair, Ngāti Whatua, Orakei. Sandy Morrison, the University of Waikato. Sean Awatere, Manaaki Whenua Land Research. I just wonder if there's a line you could introduce the work that you've been doing with you, Aroha.
Kia ora whānau. I'm a fisheries science background and I've been working for the last 10 years with our whānau hapū and iwi in the Horo Whenua Kapiti coast, and mihi to my whānau here supporting me today. We're in a phase 2 climate change project and also just completed a PhD in resource and environmental planning, supporting a sacred lake and restoration project by Ngā hapū o Orakei. Kia ora.
Kia ora.
Kia ora mahi Māori. Tuatai mi ki te mana whenua tēnei rohi. Ami ki hoi. Mō tātou mō ka uri amuri ake nei still epitomises the backdrop to our aspirations for our tamariki mokopuna, for us and our children after us. So right around our takiwā we are engaged in a variety of enhancement projects, from species reintroductions, riparian restorations, as we head down this track we're bound to, whether we like it or not, of climate change. Your reference to Papa Tuanuku is a very relevant part of that backdrop, and restoring that, the mana o te whenua.
Kia ora. Melanie.
Kia ora koutou, ko Melanie Mark-Shadbolt tōku ingoa. I wear multiple hats, as many do, and came out of Ngaitahu many moons ago, so kia ora to my whānau there. I am the Chief Māori Advisor at Manatū Mō Te Tau, Ministry for the Environment, for half the week, and the other half of the week I'm kai whakahaere Māori for New Zealand's Biological Heritage National Science Challenge. And then when the humans sleep and the birds like myself wake up, I'm the CEO of Te Tira Whakamātaki, the Māori Biosecurity Network. And I've just come out of academia after 10 years as a social scientist at Lincoln University. So my background is in biosecurity, but predominantly in disaster risk reduction. So how do we apply disaster models to biosecurity incursions? So kia ora.
Kia ora.
Tēnā koutou, tēnā koe. Koutou rā o Ngāti Pāua, tēnā koutou. Ngā waka katoa kua hui mai nei, te taha o te waitamata ki wahora. O reira, tēnā koutou. Tautoko nau ngā mihi kia rātou kua wehe, ka tangi hia. Nō reira haere atu rā. Kia tātou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Ngarimu Blair, I've been working for Ngāti Whatua Orakei for 20 odd years now. Full-time director, I guess they call them now, with a mix of iwi directorships, Mana Whenua Kaitiaki Forum co-chair of Auckland region, mixed with a bit of science, Manaaki Whenua, one of the national science challenges, and then just to keep me sane, 2 rugby directorships as well, North Harbour and New Zealand Māori Rugby. So don't know what relevance that will have here, but
Lots. Kia ora. Tuku atu te pōro kia Sandy.
Tēnā koutou katoa. Ai haere ana ngā mihi me ngā roi mato te wā kia tātou katoa. Principally, I'm employed by the University of Waikato. I'm currently the Vision Mātauranga Science Lead for the Deep South Challenge, and really enjoying the learning where we're going to bring together the Vision Mātauranga and all those philosophies alongside science. I have 2 research projects with others under the Deep South Challenge. One is Te Tai Uka Apia, which was the name that Ui or Hui Te Rangiora gave to the Antarctica when he first set sight upon it. So if you didn't know before, Māori were the first humans to arrive at the Antarctica. Well, so our research says anyway. And the second project is around culture and climate change. So I represent the Kāhui Māori on this panel today.
Kia ora.
Kia ora.
Sean.
Kia ora koutou. Sure, I'm a researcher with Manaki Whenua Land Care Research, and we've been fortunate to be funded by the Deep South National Science Challenge to look at a project that is exploring some of the land use options for iwi on the East Coast, Ngāti Porou, with respect to the challenges that they're going to face by climate change, especially with respect to erosion. And one of the main things that came out of the project that is incredibly important when doing these types of projects to actually work with whānau to identify what those solutions are that align to their values, to their aspirations and their worldview. So kia ora no.
Tēnā tātou. I guess let's start with you then, Sean, because you touched on something that we have been talking about before, Huirapa, coastal erosion. What are we doing there? How do we use our tikanga and our understandings of mate and put strategies in for the future?
Probably one of the first steps to do is to start having those conversations amongst iwi, amongst whānau, to actually get folks to realise that climate change, on top of everything, on top of all the other problems that they're facing, is an issue that they have to deal with probably in the short term, but more importantly for the longer term. One of the main principles within Te Ao Māori worldview is kaitiakitanga, the ethic of sustainable resource management, looking after natural resources for the benefit of future generations. So this ethic really drives that behaviour in terms of being more aligned to the needs of future generations. At the same time, there are those challenges with respect to meeting the daily needs of the well-being of whānau and hapū. So as a first step, there's that requirement to actually begin those conversations to work out how do you actually bring together those different values, those different aspirations, and work towards that outcome or end goal that's aligned to a future that's going to be more suitable or equitable for those future generations. So that's the first step, and I'll leave it up to some others who might be able to fill in some of the details.
I guess Matapura, are those strategies something that's in the Ngai Tahu strategy, environment strategy, climate change strategy?
Kia ora tātou. Yeah, thank you for touching on that. That's something that I'm very proud of, that we've developed a climate change strategy. It's underpinned by work from Niwa, and we've put our own cultural overlay on it. And we're trying to second guess where we're going, essentially. And the Niwa work gives us some tohu along the way of the climate change predictions.
What are they?
A drier eastern climate, a wetter Potini climate, shifting southward of the medium. So we could be growing kumara in Matapura, who knows? But we won't know for some time. But we looked at risks and opportunities, and obvious risks as have been alluded to because we're mainly a coastal people. In terms of Ngāi Tahu history, we were shut out of the inland area, so lived on coastal reserves for the last 200 years. They are where our Huirapa are largely, and our marae. So we have some dinlevers for some of our kainga, who are considering now, with the backdrop of the climate change policy, where to from here. Either relocating, might be simple for our marae, but the more intangible spiritual values that are associated with place and Huirapa are a lot harder to deal with. But those are they are nettles that we are trying to grapple with as part of our...
Mel, you were with Ngāi Tahu for a number of years there. How do iwi work well with niwa and scientists, and how does it all come together? How do you weave that to find some solutions.
Yeah. One of the biggest questions you've asked, eh? And so I'm sure everyone's got a view on it. It is increasingly easier than it has been, say, 10 years ago. And some iwi who have capacity, like kaitahu, have the ability to engage with science and science industry, and because it is an industry, and with scientists, and to look through a two-eyed lens where they can understand their cultural views and their worldview, but also have a reasonably good understanding of the science sector and what the language and the intricacies of what's going on there. But it is still difficult, especially for our communities that lack capacity and lack resourcing, because it's really resource intensive to engage with science and with science industries. So resource intensive in that it takes our time and it takes our energy. And as the panel before alluded to when they were talking about water, there isn't resourcing for our whānau to have those conversations, let alone to fund their own research. And what we increasingly find is that actually if we let our whānau lead the research themselves, then we probably get better results. So it will take a system shift, I think, from science to engage better.
Is Mātauranga Māori or Māori education, our stories, accepted well? Does it have mana with scientists?
I would argue that it's yeah. I mean, I'm a Māori scientist, first and foremost a Māori who happens to be a scientist. So I would argue that it's been a struggle. It is a real struggle to get Mātauranga elevated, let alone even acknowledged. And I think we need to tell that story better. Science is a system. Science, comes from the Latin word knowledge. Mātauranga is knowledge. They are both systems that follow the exact same path of observation and testing, and we fail to understand that simplicity sometimes, that Mātauranga is a science system in its own right. So we need to be better at telling that story, but we need again to change the science system so it accepts it. But you've got plenty of scientists on this panel who probably have a different view.
Aroha, maybe you could share the experience that you've had in the project you've been working on in Ōtaki.
Yes. So I'm thinking about the Ōtaki project as well as the Manaaki Taha Moana project, which was from Live-In through to Ōtaki in 6 different case studies. So I worked on one for my PhD, but there were 5 more. And one of the key aspects that we look at and as iwi researchers is to encourage the building of funding for those iwi that are being involved, those expertise. Often we'll have our whānau on one side of the table not being paid, giving up their time to be there, and the others on the other side of the table, whether they're scientists or council members or economics expertise, with the $100, $200 an hour bracket. And we'd love to see that the local knowledge that our people bring is really important and valuable to the success of those projects moving forward.
Like the treaty claims process.
Yes.
Ngarimu, I just want to come to you because here we are with Waitemata at our doorstep, mana whenua here in Tāmaki Makaurau. You have so many taonga to look after and to be the guardians of. How do you work with probably what's the biggest the biggest council in New Zealand, not to mention, the home of many agencies? It must be difficult at times.
Yeah, it's a massive challenge. There's 8,000 staff in the Auckland Council alone, let alone all the other agencies of DOC, NZTA and MFE and all the others that are crawling around our rohe. So yeah, I guess we've had one of the most polluted and transformed rohe in the country. It's a bit of our own fault. We invited Hobson to settle here, but so it is a challenge to be across everything. So we have tried to be a bit more strategic and targeted with our environmental management in recent decades. So we have tried to get our community engaged a lot more, our own people, just growing native plants, planting them, to bring back birds, bring back insects, bring back species that just don't get grown in the nurseries because landscape architects only choose the favourite 6 or 7 because they bloom at a particular time of year, etc., etc. Planting the things that our nannies talked about, for birthing ceremonies and the like. So we've done things like that. We've done mussel projects in Okahu Bay, and just trying to make things a little bit more bite-sized, because everything can seem so huge and unsolvable and so on. So we've done things like that. We've also done an iwi management plan, which has some teeth under the RMA, and we took a different approach. We actually co-wrote that with the council and their planning department, so that it wasn't just our mātauranga, not understood, put on a shelf, tick, done. It was actually written together with the council planners, so that it would make sense to them, and for us we would have a much greater chance of those things being implemented in the unitary plan and planning around the city.
Thank you, Sandy. We talk about ranginui and papatūānuku almost every day when we stand in mihi, and still we seem to treat them so poorly. How are the lessons in our taonga tuku iho, kōrero, there's lessons in there that can help us adapt to climate change. How do we use them? How do we bring that all together?
Well, to go back to how you started in the acknowledgement of our gods, and Sean picked up on that aspect of kaitiakitanga, and of course Te Ao Māori is an interconnected system, deeply rooted in both in our gods and spirituality and a whole value system in our pūrākau. And I think in any mātauranga Māori, kaupapa Māori, research philosophy that is part of any VM program, that's our starting point. And I think that our starting point is to catapult off a base that has already been established anyway, just simply in terms of caring for ourselves, our whānau, and then moving on to hapū and iwi. And you mentioned the contribution to New Zealand, and I'd even take that a lot further and say through our Indigenous concepts that are practiced, implemented, revived in, along the many adaptative eras that we have had to adapt to, just because we've been colonised, so we've already shown our adaptive capacities. You invited Hobson to settle, not take over. Then, we've shown that these enduring concepts are still with us, right? And so that's a contribution that we can make. There's been a political battle just to have those recognised, just to have those validated. And I think we're reaching the stage now where we have, you look at all of this, look at all my colleagues on the panel, that's their everyday talk. And we heard this morning, somebody said, Lani said, the gifts of gratitude. And so these gifts just need to be allowed to flourish, I think, in any project. And given the validity and given the integrity and be Māori-led and all these principles that we espouse. And I think what Sean touched on as well as Matapura was in climate change, it's both a cultural and a spiritual revolution. And let's really affirm that spiritual revolution that must happen. Because in the end, we all have grandchildren, we want to leave a better world. And these are some of the things that we look through in terms of the projects that come before us to ensure that these taonga tuku iho are allowed to stand in their own integrity and their own knowledge base and are valued by all those who choose to engage with it.
A good time to take that question. Does the panel believe Pākehā can become kaitiaki too? Anyone there?
Can you just repeat?
Do you believe that Pākehā can also be kaitiaki?
Yeah, I've got a perspective on that. I'll just go back to the previous question, and I think that things have changed in the science system over the past 10 years. Years ago, there used to be only a couple of us that were in some of these big projects, these big science projects. But with the advent of the National Science Challenges, we're starting to increasingly see larger teams of Vision Mātauranga focused researchers participating not only in these dedicated kaupapa Māori research spaces, but then also integrated across some of the other programs. And that's something that we never saw 10 years ago. And I think one of the reasons, or some of the reasons why that's happened, is not only through the agitators, the influencers, but also through the allies. And that's probably to continue and pick up on that point with respect to kaitiakitanga. So while kaitiakitanga is an ethic of responsibility to look after the environment for future generations, it's bound by whakapapa, is what Sandy says. To be a kaitiaki, you have to have those connections to the whenua, connections to place. Ngarimu is, and Lucy, they're kaitiaki of Tāmaki Makaurau. Well, I'm Māori, but I'm not necessarily a kaitiaki of this place. You have to have whakapapa to that place. But at the same time, you can still have that guardianship ethic of wanting to care and look after the environment. So as non-Māori, you share in those values of kaitiakitanga as well as guardianship. But you don't necessarily have to have the responsibility of being that kaitiaki to look after that particular whenua, but you can be allied to the kaitiaki to support them in their kaitiakitanga responsibility, but then also to realise those aspirations from wider society around that ethic of guardianship.
Kia ora. I'm thinking in my head of a really amazing Pākehā guardian of the earth, and his name's Rick, and he runs Zero Waste in Whaingaro Raglan, and he works alongside Māori to realise the dream of kaitiakitanga, and 73% of their waste is diverted away from landfills. So maybe that's a good example of how you can, as Pākehā, work in the same kaupapa. I want to come back to, shift the power balance in terms of research and Māori Mātauranga. Is there an opportunity, perhaps Ngarimu and Matapura, because you're working directly with council, to have some kind of environmental target in, when you're contracting or doing procurements? That would raise the, so if you're working with businesses who might be the PR company or even the cleaners of the building, that they have to demonstrate in some way their commitment to the environment.
So procurement, there are some things in there already, but they also have treaty principles in their procurement policies, and there ain't no Māoris getting contracts, so I'd like to see them tick that box first before the other stuff. But I think more related, wider to your question, and around how can Mātauranga, Māori knowledge, thinking, community be involved. I think these science challenges are great in that they are a little bit outside, they're within the science system, however, they are requiring scientists, different institutions and CRIs and universities to collaborate first and foremost. So that's a bit different, and it needed to happen. But the other thing that needed to happen, which hasn't happened as much as we would have liked, has been about having community end-user engagement, stakeholders, so that whatever's being researched and produced is actually going to be useful for a community and actually going to produce outcomes that matter to them. And then in that, getting a better engagement with whānau, with hapū, with iwi, and access to knowledge, because it's a relationship thing. It's not going to happen overnight, and has to be built upon.
Good segue there, incremental change or system shift. Should we focus our efforts when it comes to elevating the status of Mātauranga? Anyone?
Yeah, I'll give it a go. I personally think it's system shift. It's not, we've gone way past needing incremental change. I think that's what we've had. And, alluding to the earlier conversation, the National Science Challenges are a really good vehicle for highlighting system shift, because they are outside the typical CRI university model. They are outside an MB Endeavour, so they do have the mandate. They were given the mandate to be different. They're mission focused. We're on a mission as opposed to being research led. They were a way of testing whether science could be done differently, and we just need to be brave enough to show that the system can behave differently, and we can use these national science challenges as a way of showing MB and the government that science doesn't have to be competitive. It doesn't have to be ego-focused. It doesn't have to be exclusive. It can be inclusive. It can be transdisciplinary. It can be mission-focused, and it can be about outcomes and impact. So the National Science Challenges have a really big role in showing a different way of doing science. So I think, it's really about system shift.
Aroha, if you consider what a system shift might do for your mahi, I mean, if you were able to transform the system in what you've been doing, what would it look like?
The number of collaborative projects we've been working on, really encouraging Māori-led projects, working collaboratively with the teams. Those relationships develop over time, and all supporting each other, keeping each other safe in that environment. I think with our climate change project right now, looking at actually getting that transformative action on the ground. At Lake Wairongamai, we got support and funding from DOC, from Regional Council, District Council. I received mentoring from Ngā Whenua Rāhui, as well as the biodiversity officers within the Regional Council and District Council, so they were really supportive for my learning. But we had a kaitiaki team, and the hapū led and made all the decisions. So as a researcher, I was there just to support them and their aspirations, and I think that was a key to getting that active transformation on the ground. I think with the climate change mahi that we're doing, seeing that resilience, we've had landscape architect students doing designs around how our coast could look like, building up those wetlands, and Māori as well as non-Māori are very passionate about that. It's a topic that most people are aware from, so I think watch the space.
You, everyone here on this panel is Māori who is aware and educated, and I guess when we talk about te ao Māori, we talk about all of our people. So Matapura, I was wondering, to be a climate protector, it's expensive to live like that. I mean, what are some solutions that youth can see for your people who, live on Struggle Street?
Yeah, well, I'm still thinking about procurement targets. I think it's a fantastic idea if we can get that embedded somewhere.
Is anyone here from the council?
I'm going to take that home.
Yeah.
And we'll have a discussion down there. But, partnerships, I think, are the way of the future. More equal partnerships where hard resources actually come across, not just the policy.
Do you have an
shift.
Example for people to understand that?
Well, struggling to come up with an example right now.
Anyone have an example of, sharing the resource when you're doing these kaupapa?
Yeah, I mean, I've got a project that I'm involved in, and I'm sure Sandy's and Sean have got similar projects where our knowledge holders are empowered. So Kauri Dieback is a really good space, a really good example of where rongoa practitioners and knowledge holders outside of government agencies, shame on me, government agency, outside of government agencies are being resourced by science providers to do what they need to do, and the money is handed over, and we trust our communities and our knowledge holders to do the mahi. And so that's really, it is about partnership, and it's about having trust. So.
Does that happen for you, Ngarimu? You mentioned some of the growing of this, nurturing of the species that are kind of on their way out that you're doing up at the nursery, I think. Is that funded, or is that just iwi-led and iwi-funded?
Probably the best partnership we had with the science sector was in the mid-2000s. It was the force research stuff around low impact urban design. Manaaki Whenua involved, Auckland University, and we partnered on that, and our goal was just how are we going to get some awesome low impact houses at the end of it. Didn't really care about too much how we got there, but that was where outcomes focused, and through that I think Mātauranga was generated around planting plans and stormwater management and swales and et cetera. And so for me, that was a great example where it wasn't just the scientists turning up with some funding with already predetermined questions because they want to put a paper out and what have you. It was, actually asking what we wanted out of it. And we felt that was a really good partnership, and it's set the basis now for all of our design guidelines on all of our village housing, which we also take in those learnings into our commercial arena as well.
I just wanted to go to you, Sean. Recently I was up in Ngāti Kuri, and they have a very bold environmental plan where they basically want to put a wall up from Hauhora North and put a pest fence and, you know, protect the biosecurity within their rohe. Their problem is that, you know, the agencies that are meant to work with them want to leave them. How do you break down those barriers for iwi that have bold intentions and good intentions?
That's a really good question. I probably don't have the answer, but I've got some examples of experiences that I've been involved in. I was involved with the Integrated Kaipara Harbour Management Group. It's a iwi-led, community-supported group that's looking about improving the health and wellbeing of the Kaipara Harbour. So they do have issues with respect to pest management, declining species, declining biodiversity, so all of the above. And the other important issue is the precarity around the population that live close to the harbour, who have to rely upon that harbour in order to survive for subsistence wellbeing. The process, I think, in terms of getting that support from public institutions is not a overnight one where it will be solved just like that. It takes time, it takes a lot of activism, it takes a lot of conversations to massage people towards a shared outcome and vision that everyone's going to buy into. And if you reach that point where you have a collective aspiration, a collective outcome, it can become quite incredibly empowering for that community. So like HMG's been in operation for probably about 12 years now, and we're slowly making some inroads in terms of identifying some legislative solutions to actually get some decision-making power into the community, into the hapū. And just going back to my previous point, it does rely upon public institutions and their generosity and their willingness to want to partner with community and partner with iwi and hapū. And that requires leadership on their part and empathy and a shared value set to want to work with iwi and hapū. A lot of times I've seen in other areas where they've had that real adversarial type of nature between community, iwi, particularly on some councils who might be more kind of industry-led in their approaches, where the values don't have that alignment. There's a lot of short-term needs that are kind of offset those long-term intergenerational discussions. And so I think it's incredibly difficult for those types of organisations, those institutions, communities, to actually come to some type of shared outcome. But it can be done, and I think it just needs time. Just going back to precarity, so precarity is going to be like a huge issue in terms of the climate change space, particularly with our populations here in the urban centres. Then also in the rural areas, which are looking at solutions to be able to address climate change. For example, in the East Coast area, there is a number of grants and programs like the 1 Billion Trees, the Erosion Control Funding Program on the East Coast. They do provide subsidies. But I think if you're eligible for the subsidy, there's still that barrier of trying to come up with the rest of the money in order to be able to do the fencing, in order to do the planting. So while there might be that willingness to be able to invest in climate change adaptation solutions, there probably is still a underinvestment on the part of public institutions in order to help our community, even hapū, to realise those aspirations.
I think we'll go to that second question. Any suggestions from the panel for supporting better engagement with Māori?
I'll take a go at that. I think fundamentally, an early start to the relationship is where it needs to be at. We're past having proposals presented well down the track. It's got to be at that earliest point where if it's a research program, that the research goals are discussed between the two parties, and that the hapū or iwi have a good shot at getting some of their aspirations built into that piece of work. And I think that we'll see it's starting to happen in the south. It's starting to happen, and I can relate to the piece of work Niwa did for us for Ngāi Tahu. We set the parameters of what the questions we wanted them to consider. They went away and did the work, and that essentially answered, gave some tohu, some reflections of how things might pan out in the future. So that's directly benefiting us.
Good point. Ngarimu, you have a
I'll take a bit of a longer term look at it around getting better engagement with hapū, whānau and iwi. And that is, it's great if we have scientists like these who are out there engaging with our people. And the reality is we just don't have enough Māori scientists out there. So all of the CRIs, universities, are all competing for the scientists, the Māori scientists. And then someone wins one and goes, yay, but that means that it's lost somewhere else, and they've got to try and fill a gap, and they're looking around, they can't find anyone. And so we need to take an intergenerational view of this, and because, for example, my kids are kura kaupapa kids. The science teacher is the science teacher because she passed school cert science, and in 10 years has finally got one student out of kura kaupapa, our kura kaupapa, to do a Bachelor of Science at Auckland University. There are no resources, for example, in kura kaupapa to get our kids tuned into science and mātauranga. It's got to be told right. So, and there's plenty of evidence out there showing that our teachers, through their unconscious bias, are turning our kids off science and STEM. Because they're not going to pass. We'll make them do tourism, or we'll make them do all these other things that they might get pass marks. So I urge everyone in the room to think longer term about this and how we get into our kura and our schools and start turning our kids onto and challenging our Ministry of Education so that we get our babies coming through as the next generation of scientists. So this stuff will be a lot easier in the next generation. There will be plenty of Māori scientists.
Aroha, just your experience?
Yes. As iwi researchers, Mora Potama and Huhana and myself have that similar experience of kanohi ki te kanohi first, meeting and people face to face and talking, but also having a hapū or iwi representative inside. So for my example, I've come back and reconnected with my whānau, my hapū, my iwi, but I wasn't brought up there. I was brought up in another rohe and another connection, but I've lived there 15 years. But I don't have the knowledge that Moira Potama has, having been brought up and lived there all her life. And she is absolutely key into knowing that iwi politics, who the kaumātua is, for Ngāti Raukaua ki te tonga. We're going from Waikanai up through from the Tararua Ranges down to the coast, up around, Shannon, Fielding. So a really large area. So having that inside knowledge is really important. She's key in keeping that active knowledge inside. We have capacity building, so within our projects we have engagement with kohanga reo, kura, tuananga Orakei, as well as with the universities. I've taught, I go and be a kaiawhine there at tuananga Orakei and teaching pūtaiao students. But I get a little bit disappointed when sometimes I'm meeting them and they're not in roles and jobs, so please be aware that even though we're doing capacity building and we're getting Māori out there with qualifications, we'd love you to also find jobs within your research projects. And we were talking yesterday about some kind of an app where you can find where they are, or something on Google where there's a map and you can know those iwi researchers and that are qualified, but also those that aren't. And we also run bicultural workshops and wānanga, and we've done that. There's a paper by Huhana Smith and Penny Allen around running wānanga and bringing in people to be at the marae, learn our culture, learn our tikanga, We bring in experts from different fields as well as our kaumātua and kaitiaki in the morning. Maura usually puts on a really good feed and supported by our whānau and te whāo who's here today. It helps us out there. But in the afternoon we walk the whenua. So we go out and we see the awas, we'll see the beach coastline and engage. And not only do you learn from us, but we learn from you. So there's that sharing of knowledge and pukingatanga.
Sandy, you know, in your role you'll see a few of Ngarimu students coming through hopefully in the future. But what is the difference between a Māori scientist and a non-Māori scientist? You know, what differences do they bring?
Who's that to
Ai,
me?
kia koe.
Yeah, well, I mean, we could apply, in any occupation, we kind of face that, right? We face that, what is a Māori scientist, what is a Māori astrologist, and so it's not a new argument. And in some ways, we ask a lot that we would not ask another scientist in that position, you know, and so we already put in all of those double burdens, knowing that we're not maximising all of those cultural strengths that they bring to that particular task. So I guess just to make it a lot more, but before I come back to that question, I certainly think that the education system needs to do a lot more in terms of being really active in this space of kaitiakitanga, and in terms of this space of teaching our children a lot more about the political history of this country, in terms of bringing all of these values through and avoiding what Ngarimu pointed out. So, you know, that's a whole other kaupapa, and part of some international work that I did a few years ago was spending 3 years helping revise the national curriculum in the kiribus right from the time children started schools. And you know what was really needed was this cultural, spiritual revolution, because you could learn any number of things, and then based on that, then children were encouraged to find their own solutions, and they came up with wonderfully creative, innovative solutions. And they some of them have just through osmosis or just through listening and watching elders picked up on so much. So having drawn on kind of that experience and other international examples of education, I think that we can do a lot more with that. Specifically with your question, I don't think we need to wait for education systems itself to produce good scientists. I don't see why scientists can teach Māori already embedded in tikanga and reo specific aspects of their job. So one of our scholarship students working with the Marakopa community on the west coast, she's been doing her masters and learning how to do the modelling around floods. And that's awesome, and she's taken to that really, really well, and she never saw herself as a scientist. So I think that there's lots of other measures that we can use. I don't think there's one way. I think just we need to be listening to everything that's an absolute possibility. I know from what Aroha said that iwi are doing their own science wānanga in a whole lot of different ways. We've been doing that at the top of the South Island as well. So more specifically with what, say, scientist who's a Māori or a Māori scientist, yeah, I'm not quite sure on that anymore. The more I know, the less I know. So I'll just leave that question.
Here's a question. Should climate adaptation funding be led by treaty principles? Anyone? Anyone?
As a start, definitely. It's just the word principles, you know, because in the treaty debate there are about articles and there's things about partnership and what's partnership and who's going to lead and who's going to determine, and does that mean that whatever funding Māori only get a certain percentage? So all of these things come up when we talk about how that's been led, and a treaty principle might automatically assume 50-50. So does that mean 50% of the funding? You know, these deep south challenges, they're getting a lot of funding.
Good start, we're right there.
I think there's a few more nuances to the question, and it's really about what is the role of Māori in natural resource management and climate change adaptation. And if you take that principle of co-governance, and with respect to those examples of the Whanganui River and Waikato River, then there is a role to play for iwi and hapū in climate change adaptation and management. Probably one of the key things is that when you're looking at what are the assessment or what are the adaptation strategies, one thing that needs to be done is to make sure that the strategies are in alignment with what iwi and hapū want and respond to their needs and their aspirations. And then the funding can be aligned to adaptation towards those aspirations or towards those strategies that iwi and hapū have. A one-size-fits-all is probably not a useful approach to take, and so a contextual-based approach is probably a useful one, which means that you have to go as a public institution and have those conversations with iwi and hapū and involve them in that co-planning type of arrangement.
Because we've got two big iwi corporates here, I was going to ask, how do you think you're doing in terms of future-proofing the climate, Ngāi Tahu and Ngāti Whatua Orakei?
Well, our climate change policy is driving investigation of change of current practices within our Ngāi Tahu Holdings Corporation across our pillars of seafood farming, tourism. We've got a wide-ranging, diverse group of businesses which under management. We don't know the answers. We don't have the answers, but we're looking at what are possibilities. For example, within shot over jet, for example, they're looking at an electric engine, which is a fundamentally different experience than the current engines. We've adopted a new locally made body, for example. So we're looking at a whole range of things. Within our farming pillar, carbon neutral is the objective, being carbon neutral is the objective, and we're looking at a variety of other possibilities, bearing in mind what climate change might bring. We're looking, for example, up at Balmoral, which is North Canterbury. We've got some trials on new plants to the area to see how they perform. So it actually looks quite promising. Some of the varieties, orchard varieties, for example, not necessarily growing well in that area, but may adapt well, which could have be the basis for a future economic growth in that area. So a wide range of responses. We don't have all the answers, but we're certainly looking hard at it.
How do you weave in your people, for example, in order to try and prevent cot death? Every new mum gets a pepe pod,
That's right.
And everything goes with it. Would there be an option of everyone gets a compost and a worm farm?
Well, that's not a bad idea, I think.
You can have it for free.
Warms me. But the reason we have farms is about our tribal and cultural footprint, and part of that is reconnection. Given we were an early largely landless people, and we still have that desire to own land. So if we want to own land, a footprint, then we have to sustainably utilise that land. And so we're looking hard at what we're doing and how we're doing it.
Kia ora. Because Ngarimu is such a competitive rugby player, I'm going to say Ngāi Tahu's just built their first 5-star green building. How are you guys going up the hill? Are those kinds of ideas that you're thinking too as well?
Oh, we did one about 5 years ago.
Oh, no.
ACOM House, it's about a kilometre along that way. So our previous last 2 decades has been about, as I said, about reconnecting our whānau with the whenua again, so building more kaitiaki and making it very simple, recycling as you being a kaitiaki. So we've got more troops on the ground on that. Our marae now used to send 27 tonnes to Ngāti Naho, Hampton Downs landfill, and so now they are just unbelievable with their diversion rates, and they run all of our events, parakore, zero waste. So it's been
And
20
your
years.
marae is operating every day?
Pretty
right?
much.
Yeah.
It's, you have to die to get on there. So,
Quite literally.
So busy.
so we've been doing that, and then in the commercial space, we've taken some of those learnings, we've done them in some of our in recent housing, and our next phase now is really to just put some science around all of that. So we're interested in exploring planetary boundaries as a new tool. So we've had a look at the green stars, because we're all property. Thankfully, we didn't buy any farms or pine forests or fish. So it's all property at the moment. So we're exploring planetary boundaries soon, so we can start checking ourselves on how we measure our impact, not only at the commercial level, but also at the iwi level with people living in Scotland, Australia, and here, and what's our impact there. I think that could be quite exciting, and that connects us into a global measurement tool as well, which we're really interested and excited about. We've got lots of work to do, and so we're open to working with people about how we meet that challenge, because we haven't got the answers, you all haven't got the answers, but we need, this is such a massive crisis in front of us, we need to solve it together.
Kia ora. I guess as a journalist, what I can do is tell those stories that you're talking about to kind of share the word, but how do we get climate change as a national conversation? How do we get it to lead the news, for example? Yesterday there was a UN report, 100 million species heading for extinction, and it was in the third break.
So, yeah.
Any suggestions?
One of the areas that we've worked on with exhibitions was getting that science information out there. So there is that awareness, and like you say, it was on the media recently. So building on that. This time we've had a number of exhibitions in the city, on the marae, and out on the farm and in the cowshed. But this year we brought it into town, and one of the things was that the carvers and the noise actually got a few people coming in. So we not only had those that were already interested, that saw the pānui and the websites and the Facebook messages, but we also had community members that were actually just walking past, some that were international, and having come through and seeing the weaving and the whakairo happening, seeing the arts, and then also having a talk with our scientists and getting the scientific message. They came out, and some of the comments were around about having hope, and I think just having that communication and having opportunities like that. We had dance and waiata and things like that as well, different ways of getting the messages out there and having that input from the community, them feeling like they can be part of actually making those decisions, because we're all quite up on the play on those sort of things, but then also looking at the positive changes that we can all do, every person in Aotearoa, to go forward, because I think we're in the point of, let's not get to the point of no return, let's all work together, all of us.
Mel?
Kia ora.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'll give it a go. I guess, behaviour change and creating momentums is the age-old question, and some people have done it really well in the past for really bad reasons. And we'll grapple with this debate, especially in the science space. How do we create, how do we make biodiversity sexy, or in my case, how do I make biosecurity sexy like climate change is? Behaviour change only happens really two ways. People change behaviour because it tugs at their heartstrings. They want to make a difference, or they change their behaviour because policy makes them, you know. So smoking and drinking are good examples of where we legislate people to try and drive behaviour change, and then behaviour change might happen because we're really passionate about something. So we wear bike helmets, or, you know, we put our seatbelts on, or we do certain things because we understand the consequences. Unfortunately, we haven't made environmental crisis sexy, and we haven't found how to tug at people's heartstrings. I don't think the general population understands that we are on the precipice of a disaster, of a crisis, and, you know, our current models have created this disaster. The way we operate, our policies, our systems, our schooling, everything has created this environmental disaster that we're on the verge of tipping right over, and some places like Kaupapa Harbour, you know, are about to tip over and be beyond recovery. So we need to find a way to have those discussions so that they resonate with people. And unfortunately, all of the research, if you want to, you know, go back to research, all of the research coming out of, the big institutions offshore are telling us that, you know, emotions, negative emotions, you know, we know they reflect our well-being. We know that when we have negative emotions, it affects our health. We know mental health is linked to not only our thoughts about ourselves, but it's also linked to disconnection from family, disconnection from the environment, all cause mental health issues. And so negative emotions also affect our environmental well-being, not only our human well-being, but the environment. And those negative emotions are actually what drive our behaviour. So unfortunately, the research shows that when we see negative environmental stories online, we're actually more inclined to donate, we're more inclined to respond. And so while we always want to put a positive spin on it, actually negative spins on it is actually what drives our behaviour change at the moment. So we do need to be really honest and brutal about where we sit right now and what is about to happen to our environment, to our children, to my future grandchildren, so that we are forced to make a change.
Sean, how do we negatively make the climate sexy?
I can't answer that one, Ringa, but I think from my iwi corporate experience, the changes we are driving through our holdings corporation businesses are driven by our Ngāti values, set by our governance board and driven right through the organisation. It hasn't been an easy pathway, but we are getting runs on the board now. And that's the difference between possibly a non-Māori corporate and a Māori corporate, at least at the moment. I know the Climate Leaders Coalition, for example, it is getting on board with the kaupapa now, but that's my experience. That's been driven by our Ngāti values and through the organisation, business pillars.
Okay, Sean?
Yeah, just to support that sentiment, I think it does rely a lot upon our leadership being willing and able to listen to what people have to say, and people include rangatahi. So it's the ability of leaders to actually listen to the messages that are coming from rangatahi to say that, their world is going to be in dire straits. So what are you, baby boomers, going to do about it? And Gen X.
Can I make one more
Yes, go
point?
for it.
So one other frustration I have, and I think it's a challenge to people in this room, is that we have a lot of money going into the environmental space. We have a lot of money from industry, from government, from environmental not-for-profits, from communities, resourcing going into the wider environment, whether it's marine, freshwater, biodiversity or the like. And yet we still haven't saved anything. We haven't saved one Kāti tree from my perspective. We haven't saved anything. And so we need to, as a collective, start thinking about what is our joint vision and our joint goal, and we need to start making really clear pathways and directions towards achieving that as a collective, because otherwise we're just throwing money down the gurgler and we're not achieving anything. So there's a lot of money, it's my big frustration. Industry is stepping up, good on them, they're stepping up wanting to help. But at this stage we're not saving anything because we're all going in different directions.
I'd have a similar point for the project that we're working on at the moment. We're in phase 2, so over 2 years. And one of the things that I talked to some of the collaborating partners is the only disappointment in this project so far to date is that we haven't got one tree in the ground. So when I did the restoration project for Lake Wairongamai, one of the kuia said to me at the start, do not come and ask me to go to another hui. We've been talking about it for over a decade. I've been to lots of hui. Do not invite me to another one without getting a tree on the ground or a post and a fence out there. And that's one of my challenges to you today. I've heard for the last 2 days about the predictive modelling and the issues that we have, and I'd really like you to look at the solutions. Positively, how are we going to go forward? How are we going to make a difference for our children and our mokopuna? Because ultimately, as Māori, we're really keen to see that happen, but for everybody. For example, just a restoration project, it doesn't matter how old you are. We have kuia out there, and they might even be sharing just stories, or taking the plastic bags off the plants, or just awhiing the mokos, taking photos of the mokos, encouraging the other parents. We've got the kids. We had take tamariki out there, so I seen Pepe on the back with the drizzle there. And all of those people participating in it is positive change and feeling proactive about it, not only healing the whenua, the water, the stream and the moana, which affects everything, but also healing our people and making that holistic beneficial for everybody. But I'd really love to see your projects coming out with more of those positive solutions and actively making some changes, transformative change. And there's actually quite a few Māori projects that are doing that around the country, and you're all researchers, so I know you'll be good at finding those out.
Kia ora, Aroha, that's called a wero. I'm going to leave the last words there with you. Whai Sandy, have you got some encouragement for us all? Or a wero?
Well, within the challenge itself and all of the national science challenges, I think, as Mel said earlier, the opportunity that we have to promote what we're doing amongst our own communities, bearing in mind that there's this continuum of knowledge that varies. We can't put lots of expectations on all of our hapū and iwi who sometimes feel over-researched, and that's one caution that we have to keep in mind, and also to ensure that hapū and iwi aspirations are continually at the front of everybody's mind, and that we all just need to take a step back, allow them to lead, and just fall into whatever pathway that they guide us into.
Tēnā koutou ngā mātanga pūtai ao, kua hui nei. Tēnā koutou katoa I whakarongo mai nei. Māori tū, Māori ora, kia tātou katoa. Kia ora. Kia ora.